Yes, I did. Well, Shannon found it, but yeah, for sure. Right, Umilsa the boiler of Pei Vovim and Aleph, 86a. About 14 lines down from the top of the page. Umilsa the boiler of first one in the line is Gadol Mizeh. Now, for the discussion we were in the middle of yesterday was if somebody damages somebody else in such a manner that somebody damages somebody else in such a manner that temporarily their value decreases, but long term there's no difference. We said, for example, an adult breaks a bone, take a while to heal, but long term it probably isn't going to be permanent damage. So this question of Rabbo, Abai had a simple resolution for it. So Abai held one way and Rava held the other way. Itmar learned. He came al yoda vitsamsa. He hit him on his hand, and his hand shriveled up. But eventually it will heal. Abai Omer, Abai says you make two payments, one for Shevis Gedola and one for Shevis Katana. What does that mean? Shevis Gedola is the value of the hands. Shevis Katana is the fact that he couldn't do work for many days, however long it took for him to be out of work, that he pays in Shevis. Rava says, you pay Sheves, the time off of work, of each day. One second. Now, Rav basically is saying here that if you don't pay for the hands, there's a bias saying you make two separate payments, one for the hands, one for the fact that he's taking time off of work. Rav is saying no. You pay just the time off of work, but that obviously is a much more significant payment than the regular payment of Shevis. So he explained regular Shevis is watching cucumbers. It's basically a job. The job it's typically given to an invalid. But over here, he's just a temporary invalid. So you don't pay him the price of cucumber watchman. You pay him the price, his regular salary for the time that he's taking off of work. Normally, you don't pay regular salary. Why not? Because the regular let's say, for example, you cut somebody's arm was cut off. So you pay the difference in value of a slave between a slave who's, who's an accountant. Presumably accountants need their hands to type, let's say. They can't use a voice transcription service, something like that, or calculator, or whatever it is. You pay the difference in value between someone who could use his hand and someone who can't use his hand. And that includes the value of his income long term. Therefore, Sheves is only while he's in the hospital, you pay him the value of watching cucumbers, which is a basic job that he could have done without his hand had he been out of the hospital. But over here, that his hand is going to get better with time. So instead of paying Nezek for hands, you pay Sheves for full salary for each day. So let's say he's in the hospital for 2 weeks, or let's say he's out of a job for a couple of months.
Fills in the income.
So he fills it right, and that would be regular income.
Okay.
Itmar, we learned Hakateyat Eved Ivri Shel Chaveri. Person cuts off the hand of an Eved Ivri. An Eved Ivri is a Jewish slave. So quite a few. So first of all, a Jewish slave, while there's obviously you don't own him in the same way that you own a regular, completely indentured servant. But he obviously, if you own him for 6 years or whatever it is, you have a right to use him. Let's say the master cuts off his hand. Abai Amar Bai says, "Nice Shevis Gedol Eved Shevis Gedan Rav." He gives it Shevis Gedol, meaning if the value of the hand that goes to the slave, not to the master. because the slave is the one who's suffering the loss to his hand. But Sheves, the fact that the slave can't work, that loss is to the master. So that goes to the master. Rava Amar, Rava says, I call you Nasan Rav. I'm sorry, I call you Nasan Lev, give it all to the slave. However, how does the master benefit? The Yilkuch Ben Karka, they invest it. The Harav Eichel Paris, and the master eats the fruits. Right? Presumably, this means all payments, probably the exception of Ripoy, because that's going to the doctor. Ripoy paying doctor bills going to go to the doctor, but the rest of the money, mainly the nezek, how does the master benefit from the nezek? You take the value of the nezek, of the damage, you invest it, and the master gets to enjoy the benefit as long as the slave would have otherwise been working for him. An interesting way to kind of compromise. Okay. 1 second. Pshita, this is obvious. Piches etzel atzmai ve'etzel rabbi lo piches. Let's say he damages a slave such that the slave is damaged, but the master has no difference. Hechidami, what would be an example of this? The paskil reishune. You cut off the tip of his ear. I think it's called the lobe, the earlobe. So again, this is not my specialty, but apparently you don't need that thing to hear. And it certainly doesn't affect the master's work, but it does apparently look off-putting, and maybe would damage his impact, his potential suitors if he wants to get married or something. So either or he cut off the front of his nose. So everything goes to the slave, obviously, because that doesn't impact the master at all. However, let's say that this damage also to the master. This is the debate between Abai and Rava. Rava says the value gets paid to the slave, but the master enjoys the benefits of the investments. Right, so it goes completely to the slave who invests it, and the master enjoys the interest for a couple of years. And according to Abaya, it depends. The principal damage goes to the slave. The value of Sheves, the fact that he can't work, that goes to the master.
Because the master is not benefiting because he doesn't have the slave to work, right? Because the master hurts the slave.
So we're talking here about most of these cases. We're talking about somebody else.
Someone else harming a slave.
A Jewish
Someone
slave.
else's Jewish slave.
Right. Okay, we'll discuss the whole category of who damages whose slave. So that's what. Okay. It depends on the person embarrassing and the person who was embarrassed. Money. Okay. Okay. We'll try to pull out. There's really two ideas here of being embarrassed. One is shame. They used to call this blushing. Right, blushing is where for person his face changes colors. He feels his own personal embarrassment. And the other one is what Talmud will call zilusa. Zilusa is sort of the public awareness of what you did. And we'll have to talk. There are certain people that have no shame, or certain people that could be in a situation where there is no shame. And maybe that, and then we'll have to discuss what exactly the Mishnah says. So we'll talk about this. So the Mishnah says everything is according to the embarrasser and the embarrassed. Who's the Mishnah like? It's not Rabbi Yehudah, it must be Rabbi Shimon. Why? The Talmud aren't. When you talk about somebody who embarrassed somebody else, so obviously it depends on the one who caused the embarrassment. What is his social status within the community? So according to Divrei Meir basically says you look at everybody as if they were the same, as if they are the same. How do you look at them? As if they were wealthy people that lost their money. And in other words, even if the guy's wealthy, you don't treat him like a wealthy person. Or if the guy's a rich and powerful person and he embarrasses somebody else, it doesn't make a difference. He doesn't have to pay. The value is as if he was a regular person. So now this clearly is not like our Mishnah, right? What did our Mishnah just teach? Everything depends on the embarrasser and the embarrassed. Over here, clearly, it doesn't depend on the embarrasser. The one who caused the embarrassment is the one who caused the shame. Is we don't treat him based on his individual status. We treat them all as monolith, right? They're all in the same status. Rabbi Yehudah says, if a person is powerful or rich or famous, according to his power, wealth, and fame. And if he's if he's poor, according to his poverty. Shimon says, wealthy people, we look at them as we don't consider the fact that they're very wealthy to be important components. You treat them like regular people. And poor people according to their own value. So the Gemara asks as follows. Now, Rabbi Yehudah says it depends on each person. That would appear to fit with our Mishnah, right? But we'll see why Rabbi Yehudah doesn't fit with the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says that there is also a variation, but what Rabbi Shimon does is he slices the value. Meaning, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's true that we variate between the rich and the simple and the powerful, but we cut the value of powerful. We treat the powerful as if they were regular people, and we treat the poor as if they were less, like the lowest level of society. Mm-hmm. In other words, Rabbi Shimon says we don't take this concept too seriously. We don't judge the embarrassment of a powerful person exactly the way it is. We cut the valuation. We pretend as if it happened from a regular person. And the same thing is true of a poor person. We don't treat it as if a poor person. We say a poor person as if he was, the town drunk. Something like that.
How do we treat the town drunk?
Maybe like an animal, like as if an animal empowers somebody. No, but like in terms of making an evaluation. We treat people below their actual social status. So maybe there's somebody who's lower than town drunk. I don't know. Okay, so the Gemara says, 1 second. Now, Mani, who's the Mishnah like? Here, if it's the opinion of a mayor, Masnisin Katani, Hakolafim Vayish, or Misbayish, or Mayor Kulu Bahaya Dadin. According to the Mishnah, it depends on the one who caused shame and the one who was embarrassed. And according to the mayor, all the people that caused shame are all treated identically. Can't be a mayor. The Rabbi Yehudah can't be Rabbi Yehudah either. Why not? Because Katani, the next Mishnah, we'll get to it in a moment. Somebody who embarrasses a blind man is liable. The Rabbi Yehudah Amar Suma ein levaishas. Rabbi Yehudah himself says that a blind man does not have any embarrassment. Okay, again, in this context, embarrassment probably means shame. So you can't have shame if you can't see. Elalav, what must it be? Rabbi Shimon, it must be opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara says that Phil Rabbi Yehudah, it could be even Rabbi Yehudah's opinion. Rabbi Yehudah again says that the embarrassment varies depending on by the social status of the one who caused the shame. It could be when Rabbi Yehudah says that a blind person does not have any embarrassment. He meant to say that a blind person does not pay for embarrassing, presumably because he doesn't really know what he's doing. But if he is embarrassed, then you have to pay him. So the Gemara says, "I'm say if I'm vayish, say Yoshin Chayev." Somebody who embarrasses somebody who's sleeping is liable. The Yoshin Shabayish Potter, but somebody who's sleeping who embarrasses somebody else, who's sleepwalking or something like that. So then Potter he's exempt. Like Katani, and the mission does not say Suma Shabayish Potter. That in other words, the mission in the end slices up a group of people. It says these people, they could be embarrassed, but they can't embarrass. For example, a sleeping person, guy who's sleeping, he could be embarrassed, he could be exposed to shame, but he can't embarrass. We'll explain why. But the critical idea of paying for shame is that you have to be aware of it. We'll discuss it at greater length, but you have to be. If you weren't aware of what you were doing, you don't pay for shame. Obviously, a person who's sleepwalking who embarrasses somebody else doesn't pay for it because he doesn't know what he's doing. But in that category, a blind person is not mentioned. A blind person is not mentioned as an example of somebody who could get embarrassed but cannot embarrass. Obviously, the mission means to say that a blind person is exempt both from when he is embarrassed and if he embarrasses, if he causes shame.
Are we assuming that everything has to have two witnesses for these, like for any?
Nope.
No.
Not necessarily. Just a second. It must be the Mishnah here is Reb Shimon. In terms of the requirements to make somebody pay, two witnesses is an absolute requirement in anything that gives a corporal or capital offense, and anything that relates to matters of sexual nature, whether it's sexual propriety or sexual or marriage or something like that. In monetary matters, you need two people to absolutely win the case. However, if you had a single witness, or even if you didn't, you only had your own claim, there are other methods for winning a case. For example, if you had a single witness, the other guy would have to make an oath, what they call shvur deraisa, a biblical oath. We don't do shvur deraisa today. If a guy has to make a shvur deraisa, effectively he loses the case, because we're not going to let him make a shvur deraisa. And the general rule is, if he can't pay, if he can't make an oath, he has to pay.
What's the halacha around a Jew putting his hand on the Bible and swearing? We don't do that, I hope.
So will affirm, we won't swear.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We're on 86A, third wide line, 2 dots. Who's the author of this brayso? He intended on embarrassing a child, and then he embarrassed an adult. A second, no. Hold on. No. 1 second, no. I think this does not refer to a small person. This refers to a person who was of lower social status, and then he embarrasses a person who's of higher social status. He pays to the person of higher social status the value of embarrassment of the person of lower social status. The same idea. He intended on embarrassing a slave who obviously has a lot less shame than a free man. He pays the value of shame of the slave to the free man. Whose opinion is it? It's mine. It's nobody's opinion. The Gemara is the opinion. What does kata mean? Kata means somebody who has less money, and gadol means somebody who's more powerful, has more money. If it's according to the opinion, according to Meir, all people that embarrass are put in the same category. According to Rabbi Yehudah, a slave does not have any shame. Because a slave doesn't have shame, there's no payment at all. If you intended on embarrassing a slave, there's no shame to a slave, so there's no payments. According to Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon's of the opinion that says that if you had intention of embarrassing one person and ended up embarrassing somebody else, you're exempt. My time, just like the laws of murder. You have to intend on murdering somebody. They planned upon him. They laid a trap to come off, and then they killed him. They had intention to kill him. The men grabbed her clothing, and they pulled her clothing off. Until they have intention on targeting the person who they intend to target. If they make a mistake, then they're exempt. Right? Somebody wanted to throw a pail of what did they do today? Ketchup. He was spraying ketchup from the roof, target somebody, and he got the wrong person. Right? That would be an example of this. According to Rabbi Shimon, you'd be completely exempt. Samar says, it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. In other words, we never give a slave a payment of baishas, but the evaluation of the shame that a slave has, we will do. In other words, the idea is as follows: it's not Yehudah is not saying that a slave doesn't have shame. Yehudah is saying is that we don't give a payment. A slave does not receive, an indentured slave does not receive payment for embarrassment. That doesn't mean there is no shame, it just means he doesn't get paid for it. However, with regard to somebody who had the wrong intentions, right? Yeah, was a story with the daughter of the daughter of Haman, right? She tried throwing the garbage on top of Mordechai, and instead it hit her father Haman, right? She thought she was hitting a slave, Mordechai. Turns out the slave was her father. The guy dressed as a slave as her father. So in this case, we'd evaluate the embarrassment of the slave if she would theoretically have to pay, right? But she committed suicide afterwards as soon as she realized what she had done. But if Haman wanted to collect from his daughter, she would pay the value of embarrassing Mordechai as a slave. That payment would be made to Haman, even though the slave directly there would be no payment. But because she misintentioned, she had the wrong intentions. She intended for somebody else. Therefore, that's the value of what we pay. By same and other possibilities, I feel tamer of mayor. This price could be referring to a mayor. Does the word godl and cotton refer to social status? Like, doesn't. Godl mamish means an adult. Cotton mamish is a child. Okay, and basically, you pay the value of the damage. 1 second. You pay the value of damage is paid. So you have, because you intended an embarrassing child, you pay the value of that embarrassment to the child, to the adult. The shame of the child is paid to the adult. And it could be that all adults are treated as monolith, like Rameir's opinion. As previously, we were talking about people of different social status. And Rameir does not agree that Boish's embarrassment is determined by social status, which is not like the Mishnah's opinion. However, over here we're saying it could be that indeed embarrassment is paid, is not, we don't consider social status. But we do consider adult and child. That's not considered a social status. And therefore it would fit with Rameir. However, the Gemara asks, Cotton Bar Baishisu is a child. Are you able to embarrass a child? Let me borrow your Gemara for a second. So the Gemara says, could a child be embarrassed? Meaning, could a child feel shame? Obviously, he's a child. He's pretty reckless and obnoxious, and he doesn't really. You look at his own actions, and it doesn't seem like this is a person who values shame so much. So the Gemara says, and it is possible. Omer Papa the Michlei u'Michlam. The Michlamu, top of 86b. Okay, so basically, it's such a type that even though he himself will perform, stupid things that are, shameful, but he does it anyway. But he does suffer shame for being embarrassed by somebody else.
Is the humiliation different for an Eved Ivri versus an Eved Canaan?
Absolutely. So an Eved Ivri does have. So if the whole discussion here about whether a slave has embarrassment. Right. Only refers to an Eved Kanani.
Okay.
The reason is very simple. The reason is because the Eved Ivri you're not allowed like sound by this Ovid. You cannot. You can only give him dignified work. In other words, so that inherently gives him shame, right? Because you can't be the sewage department, whatever, something like that. Cleaning the septic tanks. But you could, but by the same token, you could give that job to your Eved Kanani. If that's the case, then you basically removed any shame from it. If you could force him to do basically any work, even the most shameful, effectively he has no shame. Okay, top of Pevov and Beis 86b Mishnah. Hamivayish es aram, somebody who embarrasses a person who's naked. Hamivayish es asuma, somebody who's blind. Again, over here we'll have to discuss this, but for now you can keep in mind that embarrassment over here means shame. If a guy is naked in the bathhouse, you can imagine there's not much shame there. And the same thing is true of someone who's blind. Hamivayish is a yashin, somebody who's sleeping. Embarrasses somebody who's sleeping. The yashin V'yoshan shabayish, and somebody who's sleeping that embarrassed somebody else, potter. In all these cases, you're exempt. Novel min hagag v'hizik. If a person fell off a roof and did damage, ubayish, and he embarrassed. So let's say he fell off a roof and he landed in some embarrassing way, or he landed in a pile of mud and the mud embarrassed, spread everywhere and got a bunch of people's it embarrassed them. It got onto their faces. There's no other real permanent damage, or maybe there was both. Chayav al nezek, you're liable for the damage. Potter al baishas. You're exempt from embarrassment. Why? In order to pay for baishas, you must have intention. You must intend to embarrass the other person. The rabbis, what baishu aram chayav? If you embarrass someone who's naked, you're liable, which is not like the mission, by the way. However, there's obviously a distinction that somebody who's dressed is much more susceptible to shame than somebody who's undressed. The beis hamerchatz in a bathhouse chayav. However, despite the fact that you're liable in the bathhouse, where again there's minimal shame, everyone's getting undressed. So despite that, the embarrassment in a bathhouse is different than embarrassing somebody in the marketplace. There's less shame. Can you embarrass somebody who's naked? So okay. So Rav Papa says no. This case of Aram of naked is not the same scenario as the case in the Mishnah, right? If you find a guy in the in San Francisco, I don't know if they do this in downtown Portland, they have the naturalists, and you find a naturalist and you embarrass him. That's just a euphemism for people who have no shame. So the Mishnah is referring to somebody who has no shame because he's currently undressed. But the Bryce is not talking about somebody who's undressed. What happens? The Asazika, Karchin Lamani. So they used to wear long coats, sometimes with undergarments, sometimes without. So the wind came and blew up his coat. The Asahu, the Linu Tfei, Ubaishu. So he helped out the wind to sort of completely undress the guy. They call this what's called disrobing moment or something like that. Okay, I can't remember. Wardrobe malfunction. Thank you.
Wardrobe malfunction.
Wardrobe malfunction. Right. That's the word. So this guy was having, the wind was coming and he had a wardrobe malfunction, and this guy went ahead and dramatically increased the damage of that wardrobe the embarrassment. Yeah. So basically he has to pay for that. Okay. So Gemara says, he embarrassed him in the bathhouse. Gemara says, is there shame in a bathhouse? Okay, they weren't in a bathhouse. They were on the side of the river. So it's sort of semi-private, but it's somewhat exposed. So it doesn't have the same rules. There is some amount of shame there. It's possible. Okay. Embarrass somebody while he's sleeping and then he dies. Mahu. What's the story? So what's the question? This is the question. Mishum kisufahu v'hamislei is paying baishes kisufa. Kisufa is shame. We call this blood to blush, right? His face changes colors. So is it because of blushing? Obviously, the guy never blushed again, right? He died in his sleep. He was not going to be able to blush. Or is it because of the fact that he was degraded? And he did degrade him. The fact that he died afterwards doesn't mean that he wasn't degraded. This is sort of the public's perception of his embarrassment, which is different, somewhat different, although somewhat similar to blushing. Tashma, Rameir, let's examine this. Rameir says, Cherish the cotton, yesh lahen baishas. A cherish, a deaf person, the cotton, and a child, yesh lahen baishas, they have payment for embarrassment. However, shaita ain't like baishas. If the guy's crazy, there's no embarrassment. So deaf and a child, you could embarrass them. A person who's crazy, there's no embarrassment. If we refer to zilusa, the fact that the public perceives them as embarrassed, so then it makes sense that a child, even though he doesn't have shame, because he behaves like a child, but he still could be degraded by others. That makes sense. If it's because of shame, blushing, Katan Barbarian Suit is a Katan blush. Look at his actions. He acts like a child, so he doesn't have any shame. Elamai, so okay, so what? Mishum Zelusa, because of degrading. So as if that's the case, he didn't really answer the question because I feel Shaitan Amri. Why can't you embarrass a person who's crazy? It's true that a crazy person doesn't blush, but he could be degraded by others. Gemara says, no, he can't. Why not? It's different, interesting, logical concept here. Amri Shaita is in the worst state of being degraded because he is a crazy person. He's known to be mad. That inherently means you can't degrade him further. There's nothing more degrading than being a mad person. Mad meaning as in, psychotically deranged, not present in the reality we all occupy. Okay, second. So the Gemara says, okay, regardless, let's prove from here that from this brayso that embarrassment refers to zilusa, being degraded by others, the public's perception of your embarrassment. The imishum kisufa katan bar kisufa, is it possible to cause shame? If the key idea here is shame, can a child feel shame? So the Gemara says, the Amar Papa, like our Papa said, the michlamu lei umichlam. Just like we explained before, that a child, even though he behaves in ways that have no shame, but you could cause him shame, and you'd be liable for that. So too, over here also you could be referring to shame, and the katan would be liable to pay for because you embarrassed him. Okay, Papa says, this is the question. The same story. The guy who's sleeping and you embarrass him and he dies. Because of his own blushing, and he's dead, so he obviously never blushed. Because it's sort of embarrassing for his family. So Gemara says, Toshma, let's examine this. Cherish and Kotan. Yesh le'boshus. A deaf person and a child. Yesh le'boshus. They do have embarrassment. Shaita, if the guy's mad, in le'boshus, there's no embarrassment. So Gemara says, if you refer to the embarrassment of the family, Hanatani Kotan, then it makes sense you can embarrass a Kotan, even though a child has no shame because he acts like a child, but you can still embarrass his family. But if the idea here is because of shame, Kotan Barboshisu, can a child feel shame? Okay, so it must be the embarrassment here is defined by embarrassment of the family. If that's the case, someone who's mad also, you can also embarrass his family by embarrassing him. Gemara says, no, the fact that the family has a member of its family that's completely deranged, completely mad, that's the greatest form of embarrassment. Okay, so Gemara says, okay, so what's it must be referring to the embarrassment of the family. So that still answers the question. Because of its shame, if it's shame, is a child, it can cause a child shame. So Gemara says, yeah, you could. Even though a child acts without shame, but if you embarrass him, you could cause him additional shame. So Gemara says, Vatani, we learned in the Brayso to Rabbi a deaf person could feel shame. A mad person cannot. Cut on a child. Sometimes he has, sometimes he doesn't have. Okay, so the Gemara is saying this Brayso supports the opinion of her papa. How is it possible that a child sometimes feels shame, sometimes not? The difference is in other words, if you embarrass him such that he feels shame, then you cause him shame. If you embarrass him in a way that he doesn't feel shame because he's a child and behaves like a child, so then there would be no payment for embarrassment. Start the next Gemara. Somebody who embarrasses a blind person. So Gemara says, "My sister like Rabbi Yehudah." Our mission says, you embarrass a blind person, you're exempt. Our mission is not like Rabbi Yehudah. Tanya Rabbi Yehudah, Suma Elei Baishas. 1 second. Okay. Our Mishnah says that according to 1 second. Okay, according to our Mishnah, if a just rejected that. Okay. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehudah, a blind person does not pay for embarrassment and doesn't receive a payment for embarrassment. According to our Mishnah, a blind person does not receive payment but does make a payment, because our Mishnah only indicates that a sleeping person does not make a payment, but a blind person would make a payment for embarrassment. Okay, so that's how our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehudah. And now we get into a bit of a side discussion. Okay, just like Rabbi Yehudah exempts a blind person from receiving paying for embarrassment. Rabbi Yehudah exempts him from exile. If he kills by accident, he does not go to exile. He does not get malchus. He does not get lashes. And from capital punishment. My time is Rabbi Yehudah. What's the reason, Rabbi Yehudah, that a blind person is exempt from all of these? We learn I from false witnesses. Blind people cannot serve as witnesses because they have to be able to see. It says L'sachos einecha olav. Yeah, basically don't have compassion for their eyes. Okay, obviously they have to have eyes to be able to see. So if false witnesses don't have eyes, you don't have to pay. So similarly, 1 second. Similarly, with regard to the law of embarrassment, a blind person is exempt. It's compared to the story of false witnesses, which requires them to be able to see. 1 second. How do you know that you're exempt from exile? The Tanya says that the guy killed below Reis, Prat Summa, different Yehudah. Yehudah says below Reis means he didn't see, but otherwise he could have seen. The problem here is that he failed to see, meaning otherwise he was eligible to see. Meir is to the contrary. The rabbis assume it includes specifically a blind person who kills by accident also goes to exile. My time with Rabbi Yehudah. What's the reason for Yehudah? Rabbi Yehudah would explain. A person who goes to the forest to chop wood, even if a blind person went to chop wood, that he didn't see, but otherwise he was capable of seeing. That tells me that it excludes a blind person. For Meir says no. It also says that he killed the person without intent, meaning that otherwise he would have had intent if he would have been more aware. The problem is that a blind person could not have been more aware. A blind person always kills without intent, and without knowing that intent would be possible. So in other words, we have two limitations that tell me the same thing, that excluded a summa, a blind person. So, and the general rule here in logic is that ein mir achar mir el rabbis. When you have two limitations, that actually is an inclusion, right? If I'm not going to go home, that means I'm going to go home. So same thing. The Torah says we do not include a summa, a blind person, because a blind person is included in the penalty. Okay. Rabbi Yehudah Rabbi Yehudah says that bivlidas means that if you had intention, you don't go to exile. Even if there were witnesses, the guy would be murdered. The guy would be executed for his crime. There's no witnesses, he still doesn't go to exile. Exile is limited to accidents, not a scenario where the guy intentionally killed without witnesses. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow.